Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You may have all this world. Give me Jesus. Dark midnight was my cry. Dark midnight was my cry. Dark midnight was my cry. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You may have all this world. Give me Jesus. Just about the break of day. Just about the break of day. Just about the break of day. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You may have all this world. Give me Jesus. Oh, when I come to die. Oh, when I come to die. Oh, when I come to die. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. We may have all this world. Give me Jesus. You may have all this world. Give me Jesus.
Good morning. It is good to see you all this fine day. For some reason, it feels like it's been a long week. Couldn't say why. Maybe I'm getting some of it from some of you. Exodus chapter 3. You know, when you get a good holiday that comes along close to a sermon, pastors love that, because many weeks you will sit and think, well, I've got this book, and yeah, I know, we've had it for 2,000 years. I should know what to say next by now. But, you know, what's going to come next? And sometimes you get really lucky, and a holiday comes right next to it, and you can follow it thematically, and it works out nicely. And this week we actually have two big ones tomorrow. We have Father's Day. Does anyone know what the other one is? Yeah, Juneteenth, which is the celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation, which, you know, many people had celebrated for a long time before it finally became a federal holiday. And, you know, you may find that these two don't link together, but in the story of our Father God, they link together quite nicely, don't they? So, I came to what is actually one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And I thought we could kind of wander through it. And we're going to cover a good chunk of ground here, and I'm going to try not to keep us too late. But I do adore it. And it fills me with so much comfort, as chapter 3 and 4 Moses I find incredibly relatable, because I too am a coward. And I feel completely comfortable admitting that. There isn't too much lead in, but to say that the story of Moses, right, we need to kind of talk about this a little bit to get where we're at, right? Moses is born during a time period where where the Pharaoh has deemed Israel to be a threat, so he's going to have all of the boys killed. They probably have an age range in which that occurs, and so infants are being killed left and right. It's a horrifying time to be an Israelite, to be a Hebrew in this time period. Except Moses has a parent who puts him in a little basket. The original word is actually an ark. And that ark takes Moses down river. He's found by, one of Pharaoh's daughters. She takes him in, he's raised, he's educated in the house of Pharaoh. This is, to me, just a delightful piece of irony, that the man who would have liked nothing better than to snuff out the life of this child puts his resources into ensuring that he grows up educated and well cared for. That's Moses. Moses goes at some point. We don't know quite. There's a lot of time, honestly, between this story, the stories in chapters 1 and 2 and chapter 3. A lot of time is covered for Moses. At some point, though, he goes out to see his people and he sees there is a taskmaster, right? That he is mistreating one of the Hebrews. And Moses murders him, thinking that this would be an act of deliverance for these people, that they would appreciate it. Later on, Moses comes and sees two Hebrews arguing amongst themselves and says, well, essentially, why are you fighting with each other? Shouldn't you get along? Can't we find a way to reconcile this problem? And they turn on him and say, well, who made you a ruler and a judge over us? To quote Stephen's sermon on the matter. Are you going to kill us because we're not doing what you want, like you killed that guy the other day? Which to Moses means that this thing that he did, that he thought perhaps nobody would have seen, that he could get away with, is known. And now he's in trouble. Pharaoh is probably going to have him killed over it, so he flees off to a place called Midian. That's where he's living now. He's about 40 years old when he runs. He's probably 80 by the time that this story begins, so in that neighborhood. And, he's gotten married, he's tending the flocks. So Moses, by the way, also, this is part of an Abrahamic prophecy, that God tells Abraham, your descendants are going to be as uncountable as the stars, as the sand on the ground, but that there's going to come a time in which they're going to be enslaved. They're going to be mistreated by these people. But God says, to Abraham, I will deliver them. That these people who have been oppressed and held down will be delivered by God himself. That this is God's promise. Generations and generations before these people were born, God had a promise to deliver them into freedom. So, Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Moses, by the way, is not tending his own flock. He's probably not the most well-to-do of the people we've seen so far, right? Genesis is full of success stories. They do really well. Moses does not tend his flock. He tends another person's flock. He works for his father-in-law. No shame in that. But that's where he finds himself there at the mountain of God. He's with the sheep. This is his daily pattern, right? Moses, we can believe, is a shepherd. He takes care of the sheep. That has a rhythm to it. And he has probably been doing something similar for a long stretch of time, decades. This is his rhythm. This is how he does things. And I do believe God's at work during this time period where we see this gap in time, because I think that the silent periods are when God can do a lot of work on people. There aren't a lot of distractions out there beyond the wilderness. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. This is odd, right? Every bush I have ever seen on fire was consumed. This is different. This is supernatural. This is bizarre. This is something out of the ordinary, which to me also implies maybe it's not fire. Maybe it just looks like it to him. But what comes next is meaningful. Then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the brush is not consumed, right? He's day in, day out, same rhythm. We take care of the sheep. We journey here. We know where the water is. We know where the grazing is. We run to these particular patterns that we know. And yet, God interrupts Moses. For decades, his rhythm has probably been very similar. He has spent time learning the lay of the land. Why is he in this region? Well, it's probably good for the flock. But God is doing something over there, something new, something that has never been seen before. And for Moses now, there is the choice. Is Moses going to engage in the same activity, the same rut that he always has existed in? Or is it time for something new? Is he going to turn aside and see what it is that God is doing over there? And these are probably not the thoughts he's thinking immediately. Right now, it's, well, that's something different. That's something out of the ordinary. I think I will go and see that. But that is a lesson for us, I think. We all have our own ruts, our routines, our own particular things, but that God's doing something, and sometimes it's just out of the corner of the eye, isn't it? That we have to turn to be involved in what God is doing. And sometimes I think we miss out because we didn't turn aside to see what God was doing over there. Because we had to engage in the rhythm. We had to keep doing the thing. There was stuff that had to be done. The habits that we were engaged in. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called out to him from the brush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. I can just feel it, that God must be a little bit happy. Oh, he's turning. I got his attention. I grabbed hold of Moses, which is something I think God's been working on, just as he does with each and every human heart, that God has a great desire to grab hold of our attention, even in the midst of our busyness and our routine. Here I am, he says, which is a pretty typical response, right? We see that a lot. Here I am, essentially saying, I'm paying attention, I'm listening. Then he said, come no closer. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place which you are standing is holy ground. God is there. God is in the midst of Moses. He said further, I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And this is especially meaningful right now if you've been reading your lesson study, right? This is the thing that this last quarter has been focusing on, is those people, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. These people, essentially, I am the God who is in the midst of your ancestors. When they wandered in the wilderness and they had their steps forward in faith, I was there. That this is the God who can be relied upon. Remember the promise we referenced earlier of Abraham? This is the same God who said to Abraham, your descendants, they're going to find themselves in a fix. They're going to be enslaved and mistreated by somebody, but I'm coming to deliver them. So when it says, I'm the God, when God says this, I am the God of your ancestors, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it is, I am the God who is coming to deliver you. I'm that God. I'm the reliable God, the God who kept his promise to every successive generation from Abraham on down. That God. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And I think sometimes we get a little critical of Moses, but if you were experiencing the literal presence of God in this midst, I think you would be alarmed too. And I do wonder how long it takes Moses. How long does he stay with his face covered? Because he's scared of this interaction. Afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on the account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings. I'm not a big crier. I don't have anything against it personally. I'm just not. That text almost always gets me. Think about Hebrews, right? We do not have a high priest who is unfamiliar with our struggles, right? Similarly here, God says, I've seen it. I have seen the suffering of my people. He is not oblivious to it, of the things that have been done for generations of these oppressed, poor people who find themselves chained down by their oppressors. He says, I've seen the things that the oppressor did to them. And here it is. And I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them into a broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a good land, the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me, and I have also seen how the Egyptians oppress them. So come. We'll get to that in a second. God sees the suffering. And what is his solution there? He says, I have come down. This should be ringing very strong bells for Christians. That the Lord sees the greater oppression that sin has on our lives. And behold, he comes down into its midst to deliver us. Jesus, into the midst of sin, for he has seen the oppression that sin has on his people, humanity, on you and I, the boot of the devil standing on your neck. And Jesus said, no more, for I have come down to deliver them. Them, us. That he has heard your cry, the oppression that you feel. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. I bet so far Moses is starting to come out of his shell. This is how I picture it. That as God is describing this good land and how he will step in and deliver his people. But now Moses has something to do here. Here's the deal, Moses. I'm sending you to the most powerful person in the region. Possibly one of the most powerful people in the world. The guy who is the Pharaoh at the beginning is probably Ramesses II. His son, his 13th son, becomes Pharaoh after him, and it's hard to kind of gauge which Pharaoh is the worst Pharaoh in the narrative of Exodus. But these are some pretty heavy hitters as far as Egyptian history goes. Pretty powerful people. And not all pharaohs were great pharaohs. Just because your dad was a great king did not guarantee you were going to be one. I think Solomon's story teaches us that. But these were some pretty big pharaohs. These were some heavy hitters. And when Egypt, we often think of Egypt as kind of its own self-contained thing, and we don't often, and since we use the word pharaoh, not emperor, we sometimes underplay the space in which Egypt can occupy. At extreme strength, Egypt goes down into the Sudan area. Actually, you will find that it's believed there are more pyramids outside of Egypt than inside of Egypt, that they're taking over these other areas. They would have also had extreme influence over Canaan during heights of power. Big, big areas, essentially an empire. And this is what God is saying. Moses, you're going to go to the most powerful person on the planet, a guy who could essentially look you in the eye and say, we're going to kill you now. The guy you were running from. Not the same person, but as far as Moses knows. The same person, essentially, that's you ran from before, that you were so scared of that you've spent 40 years here with the sheep. I'm going to send you to him. This is an intimidating enemy, right? For Moses, isn't it? I mean, you have somebody who's a hired man for the sheep up against Pharaoh. But that's not the real fight, is it? If it's Moses against Pharaoh, who is the more equipped to win the fight? Pharaoh is. If it is God against Egypt, who is outmatched? Egypt. I will send you to lead the people out of Egypt. And he said, I will be with you. And this shall be the sign for you that it... I've lost my spot. I'm sorry. This shall be a sign for you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain, on the mountain of God. We have the rest of the book. Does that happen? Yes, it does. Does God follow through on his promises, same as he always does? Absolutely. Moses doesn't have the full story. So what is left for him is the pursuit of faith, because he is focused here, as we will see, on who is against him. Pharaoh is an intimidating enemy for Moses, but not for God. And that Moses is not facing down the full might of Egypt by himself. God says what? I will be with you. That Pharaoh may be against you, but I am with you. That is a great strength and a comfort to us, I think. And here we proceed with Moses' excuses. But Moses said, if I come to the Israelites and I say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Pretty typical, right, to ask for names when first meeting somebody. That's generally just good manners. A little bit more in Moses' culture. As we've seen throughout some of the studies in Genesis, you see that it was a lot to a name. The name was to say, what are you? What are you like? What is your character? What is your person? And there was a lot packed into a name. There are still cultures that have some relation to these ancient practices that will not give you their actual first name, will give a nickname instead. Essentially, what are you? Who are you? What are you like? Assuming that these people who I'm going to, so we see his first fear, right? The people. Well, technically his first fear is he's a little scared of God. Then, Well, what about these people I'm going to? The Hebrews, right? The same people who, when I tried to rescue one of them, that didn't go so well. And then they said, well, like, who are you to be in charge of us? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent you to me, or has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, thus you shall say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. And this is my title for all generations. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has appeared to me, saying, I have given heed to you and to what has been done to you in Egypt. I declare that I will bring you up out of this land of misery in Egypt, to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. Essentially, God gives an answer, right? His name, and it's long. We typically say, I am. We encapsulate it within that, but God goes a little longer. But let's concentrate on the I am for a moment. A confusing name, because God is saying something, essentially, a present tense perfect is maybe the best way we could put it. That God is. I exist. And that is an existence that has always existed and always will exist. You think that just God's name is going to be enough to understand me, Moses? I think you may be mistaken. That this is a God who is big, but also God points to his past actions, right? He's not just saying, I'm the God who's affiliated with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God who is related to those through the stories that these people have heard from their parents and grandparents that have been carried down through the generations. Like, this shows a character of God. And that this God, who keeps his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has not changed. I am. Has sent me to you. And let's talk about this list, the Canaanites, the ites. That is a lot of people. That's like 5 different groups that are already in this land. And God is saying, I'm sending you, this group of people, and I'm going to take you back to this land. And what does Moses hear? Well, that's a lot of people who are there. What are we going to do about them? One step at a time, it seems. Because that's another layer of enemies that need conquering. But it is a land flowing with milk and honey. I love that phrase. In English, almost any language, the phrase flowing with milk and honey is just it has a nice flow to it. That it is speaking to a land of plenty. Do you know when you would have had honey? Never. Milk? It's probably talking about goat's milk. You would have had probably at some point. But to slaves, he is saying, I'm going to take you out of this piece of oppression, this place in which you have been kept down and chained, where it is not a place of plenty, but a place of want, right? That is essentially what we're pointing to. And out into a land of plenty. Imagine a river with milk and honey flowing there. Honey would have been the sweetest, most exotic thing you probably ever tasted. There was no refined sugar. This was it. And you could have made honey, sure, the bees, but also there's other methods of essentially syrup from dates. But that this land is flowing with it. It's not running low. The land in which God wants to draw his people out of this land and into the new land. It's good. It is full of plenty. They will listen to your voice, and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say, Let the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, met with us. Let us now go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. I know, however, that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will perform in it. After that, he will let you go. When God does the things that occur later on, God is fighting on so many levels that are not immediately obvious. In fact, each plague is not just an assault on the infrastructure of Egypt, but also on a false god. He takes a hit at them, one after the other. You can actually see that various elements correspond. Some Bibles even show you a little graph on them. But that God starts poking at Pharaoh's not tough enough. Their gods aren't tough enough to take down God. What could be? They were outmatched, outclassed, everything. God was taking them down. That all the wonders. Remember, it is not Moses who is reaching out his hand to deliver the people. That it is God who performs the wonders that delivers his people. And there are also archaeologists, even non-Christian ones, who do point to this same time period and say there does seem to come an odd economic collapse in Egypt, that we're not certain why. I have an idea why. So, stretch out his hand and strike Egypt with all his wonders. And God is capable of some wonders. Amen? I will bring this people into such favor with the Egyptians that when you go, you will not go empty-handed. Each woman shall ask her neighbor and any woman living in the neighbor's house for jewelry or silver or gold and clothing, and you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, and you shall plunder the Egyptians. That this army of slaves who has no weapons, no organization, is going to watch as God steps in and takes down the mightiest empire currently reigning on the planet. And then they're going to walk out of there with all the money without having raised a hand. These are the things God is promising to his people, to Moses. That I have a plan. I have seen the way these people are oppressed. That even while Moses and God are having this chat, that the slaves are being mistreated at that moment. And he says, I'm going to draw them out of this land of want and into the land of plenty. It's going to be a goods land, a spacious land, a broad land. This, to me, is one of the greatest illustrations that God has for sin, too, is that sin is cramped and confining. That is what a chain does, whether it's of gold or not. It is a chain nonetheless. A cage is a confining place. And that is what sin does to us under the guise of freedom, is it will trap us. I remember I love this place that as a kid I went to the Walla Walla City Church, and we would go every summer out to the Eagle Cap Wilderness in the Wallowas and go backpacking. And during the early times, the forest had not been well managed, so you were really socked in a lot. And there was brush and other stuff, and you were sometimes having to push through things to get to the trail and all sorts of stuff, and it's not great. And you come to a point where you would round the corner and you would start to where the valley was. These huge mountains up on either side, and you would walk straight down towards the peak of Eagle Cap, like a postcard. And you would round that corner out of the cramped places and into something broad, and you could feel, though you were probably carrying 20 pounds, you would feel relaxation come over you as you entered into a broad space. I always feel better in open areas. I recall the last time I went to New York, and we will pray for those people, that to get from one place to another had to go onto the subway. If you have not been on the subway in a major metropolitan place, but you have seen a Big Frank's can, you know how you open them, and inside they are all pressed to each other, especially that middle one. You're all the middle one. That's it. And being able to see, waiting until the doors would open and I could step out into a broad and spacious land. That the platform felt like I was in the valley of the kings. Sin, though, is a confining place. It keeps us socked in, chained down. That is what the devil wants for your life. But that God calls us into a broad land. Think about a broad land. You have a lot of options as to which way you're going. That is a feature of freedom. Being able to travel out into the open. To me, that is also one of the pictures I have of heaven. It is spacious. Because Jesus says, right, in my Father's house, some of your versions say mansions. That doesn't make any sense. No house has other houses inside of it. It is, in my Father's house there are many rooms. And there's one with your name on it. There is a room for us that the Father's house is big enough, spacious enough for you and I to have a place in it. A place in the Father's house. For you. Right? Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you. And for me. And it is a broad land. A land of plenty. Then Moses answered, oh, these are fun. But suppose they do not believe me or listen to me, but say, the Lord did not appear to you. I give him a little more attitude when I read it. Say I go, God. Say I go and I do what you're asking, and they do not believe me. Even though God said, right? They're going to believe you. And here's some signs. It says, say I go. They don't buy into it. They don't listen to me. I was the guy who was raised by the guy who killed their children, right? I was the guy who they pushed off and said, who are you to be a ruler and a judge over us? Then the Lord said, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw the staff on the ground, and it became a snake. and Moses drew back from it. The original language actually is Moses ran from it. And I do love the image of Moses starting, you know, when you've started to flee. I remember hiking just down off the Deschutes River, and I heard a snake, the sound of a snake striking. Not a great thing to hear when you don't know where it is. And I just drew back to the point I was sitting on the ground, and I watched as a little, it was not a rattlesnake, but it wanted me to believe it was, sitting there on the ground. As God has to call Moses back, hang on. Then the Lord said to Moses, reach out your hand and seize it by the tail. This, by the way, do not try this at home. This is not where you grab a snake. It has the ability to whip around. And this to me is, God is giving him some signs, but he's also building Moses' faith. Because Moses has to trust God enough he probably knows, that's not the side you grab the snake from. Reach out your hand and grab it by the tail. So, he reached out his hand and grasped it, and it became a staff in his hand. Just imagine that. So that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to you. Again, notice how God keeps drilling that back into him. I'm the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the promise-fulfilling God. Again, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. You know, this move. And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, his hand was leprous, as white as snow. Then the Lord said, put your hand back into your cloak. So he put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his body. If they do not believe you, or heed the first sign, they may believe the second sign. If they do not believe even these two signs, or heed you, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. No demonstration on this one. But that does give us a little foreshadowing, right, of some things to come. But Moses said to the Lord, "O my Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor even now that you have spoken to your servant. But I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." There's a lot of debate over what exactly this means. Some people for a long time have said, well, perhaps Moses has a speech impediment. That's possible. It's also possible that he is saying, I haven't had to speak Egyptian in 40 years. And with language, if you don't use it, you lose it. There is perhaps another option which I hold to, which is that Moses is looking for ways to get out of this. And it's possible he may just be somebody who's not eloquent. He's not maybe the best speaker. He certainly has a lot of speeches for somebody who's not a good speaker, but he maybe doesn't have a lot of confidence in it. It's hard to say precisely. Then the Lord said to him, "Who gives speech to mortals? Who makes them mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to speak. That thing that you're worried about, that thing that you think isn't good enough to utilize, as God says, I'm going to be with that. I'm going to be with your mouth. The mouth that you say isn't good enough for the purposes I'm calling it to, I'm going to be with that mouth. Which is a very interesting way of speaking, but that is what God is saying. That avenue, that object, that tool that is part of Moses' body, God is going to utilize. And he says, now go. And I will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to speak. But he said, oh, my Lord, please send someone else. Can't you hear the pleading? Please send someone else. Anyone. This is the culmination of this back and forth with God, has really come down to this. I don't want to do it. And to me, I hold to that I think Moses is scared of things. He's scared of what the people will think. He's scared of the Egyptians. There's a lot of things to be afraid of, by the way. But he has mischaracterized what's really doing the work. God's asking him, will you be a willing participant in sharing this, the news of freedom, where I send you? Will you be willing to go where I point? Say what I need you to say. Are you a willing participant in my work? This is not Moses' hero story. This is God continuing to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God that brings freedom and keeps his promises. And we could be, Calvinists. Well, couldn't God get this done no matter what? Sure. I think that God was going to get this done. That God is going to keep his promises. So why Moses? I don't know why God fights so hard for Moses. But Moses has a purpose that God has in mind. God is calling him into fully realizing who God needs him to be. At 80 years old. If you have ever been under the impression that it's too late, you're done, keep in mind, God uses him for another 40. And I haven't seen any 120-year-olds around lately. That God is with us. That there are many things I think that we can feel scared and anxious about. But when it is us thinking about it's me versus my adversary, you may often find yourself on the losing end. But when it is God who reaches out his hand and uses his wonders to defeat your enemy, it is always the enemy who is outmatched. Please send someone else. God becomes frustrated with Moses. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, what of your brother Aaron the Levite? I know that he can speak fluently. Even now he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, his heart will be glad. Moses is saying, I'm not a good speaker, I can't do this, please send someone else. You know what? Before this conversation happened, God sent Aaron on his way. Aaron, right? He says Aaron's already on his way. Was Moses ahead of God? No. God was well ahead of Moses. He knew the excuse. He knew all the things. God had something to do. And it was essentially that he was delivering the good news of freedom. And there were going to be times in which Moses was going to stand up and look at the most powerful person in the world and say, give up your free labor force. That's scary. If you think you could have done that with no fear, you may need to re-examine. But remember, it is God who is there. God who is fighting the battles. Will the people need some convincing? Sure. Is God not up to the challenge? Absolutely he is. 3 signs worth. Technically 4. That he's up to the challenge of the work of convincing and drawing people into the realities of his person, of his freedom that he is calling people into. Do you think God is up to the challenge of convincing your friends, your family members? Do we think that God is up to the challenge of freeing this world, of setting things back to right? I think so. Because I cannot imagine a challenge that has yet baffled my Jesus. I want to close with this. I was given this book a while back called I Am Not, But I Know I Am. And it sits on my shelf because pastors need shelves full of books for ballast. And to convince you that I may actually be intelligent. Who's to know? But I am not, but I know I am. Welcome to the story of God. And at the end there's this little poem I want to close with. Essentially, he rewrites to a new excuses that we may have, new draws on our hearts, and God's response remains pretty much the same, as you will see. And here he says, for every cry, there is one answer. I need help. I am. I need hope. I am. Who could possibly be smart enough to figure all this out? I am. What works? I am. What lasts? I am. What's the latest thing? I am. What's the hippest thing? I am. I need a fresh start. I am. I need a bigger story. I am. My vision is bigger than my resources. I am. Nothing's real anymore. I am. Who can I trust? I am. I'm not sure who's on my team. I am. Nobody's listening to me. I am. I don't have a prayer. I am. My marriage is sinking and I don't know where to turn. I am. I can't hold on. I am. My kids deserve more. I am. I'm pouring into others. Who's pouring into me? I am. If we fail, who will get the job done? I am. I'm not sure why I'm here. I am. I've given all I can, and it's not enough. I am. I'm tired. I am. I quit. I am. I can't. I am. I need a drink. I am. I need a fix. I am. I need a lover. I am. I just need someone who can hold me. I am. God is calling us into a magnificent work of spreading the good news of freedom for people of this world who find themselves enslaved by sin and the devil. That there is a key to freedom extended out to everyone through Jesus. and that He is up to the challenge of meeting our loved ones who have turned away from Jesus. He's up to it. He's never been outsmarted or outnumbered. He's up to the challenge of reaching out to every person here, but He calls us into the work of sharing it with this world. We could come up with a million excuses why we're not up to it. Jesus is. You're weak? Welcome to the club. It's part of being human. But the I Am, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the same God who was consistent and keeping His promises, working with these people, right? Remember Genesis? Do they have it all together? Was that your impression reading Genesis? All the time? I hope not. But God was at work. He was in pursuit of each heart, and He still is, that the world knowing Jesus is our mission. And I want to join Jesus in what He's doing. Let's pray. Dear Jesus, I thank You that You are our good Father, that You share with us the good news of freedom, that You provide the key, that You extend freely to each and every person. That Jesus, give us fortitude and courage as we step forward in our pursuit of You and wherever You are drawing us. I thank You as always for Your love. Amen. Happy Sabbath, everyone.